What's going on, guys? And in this video I'm going to show you how to use audio mixers, adjust its values with sliders, and save the sliders values between scenes. So let's jump right into it. So first of all, we need some sounds to control with the audio mixer. So I'm going to create some bubble sound effects. Go ahead and create an empty object, and I'm going to call it audio manager and reset its transform. This audio manager is going to have an audio source, and I want this audio source to play my bubbles clip, and we're going to make sure it's looping. So now if we hit play, we have sound. So now with sound, let's create an audio mixer. Right click, create, and go audio mixer. I'm going to call this mixer. Go ahead and double tap your mixer and it'll bring up this window. You can undock it if you want, but I like to keep it docked down here. And the first thing that you'll notice is in our groups, we have this master channel. And if we hit play, we can press edit and play mode. And if we adjust this, it doesn't change our bubbles volume. That's because we need to go to our audio source and in the output, select our master channel. Hit play. And now we can control the volume. But I want this to be a little bit more flexible. So instead, I'm gonna create separate channels. So I'm going to create one for music and press on master again, add another channel, and I'm going to call this one sound effects. So now I'm going to go back to the audio manager audio source, and instead of the master channel, I'm going to select the music channel. I know it's bubbles, but let's just pretend it's music. So now with that selected, I also have button sound effects. So I'm going to make sure to go to my button sound effects master and make sure the output is under the sound effects channel. And also how the channeling works for all these groups is the parent controls the children's volume. So if I child music to sound effects, and if we hit play, you could see that the sound effects channel now has control over the music. Now let's undo that because I don't want that. And now I want to explain the solo, mute, and bypass buttons. So if we hit play, if we press solo on the sound effects, you'll only hear the sound effects. But if we hit mute on one of them, it mutes them. And what bypass does is if you add an attenuation to your channel, so if I hit edit and play mode and add an attenuation, and let's select an echo, and in the inspector I could just play with its values, say 18 and 47. We could see that the bubble sounds completely different, but if we hit bypass, it bypasses all of the effects. That's all I want to cover on the mixer. Now let's create sliders that the player can use to control these channels. So let's go ahead and create a UI canvas. And do not delete your event system. I already have one on my tank canvas. And on your canvas, right click and create a slider. Jump into the scene view. And I'm just gonna make this a lot bigger. And I'm gonna slide this to the right. I'm gonna rename this to music slider. And I'm gonna take the fill out of the fill area and delete it. And take the handle out of the handle slide area and delete it because those objects are useless. Now I'm just going to customize my slider a little bit. I'm going to make the fill some kind of red. And that looks alright. And now let's label this slider. So right click on your slider and go UI Text Mesh Pro. I'll rename this to text. I'll go in its settings and align it on both axes. And I'll go into the scene view, hit W, slide it up. And I'll change the text to music and change its font. That looks pretty good. Now let's just duplicate this slider and call this sound effects slider. Go into the scene view and slide it down. And I'll change the text to sound effects. Go to the game view. That looks pretty good. Now we need to connect these sliders to the mixer channels. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a new C# script. I'm going to call this volume settings. Now I'm calling it volume settings because you're probably going to have these sliders in your settings menu. So this is an appropriate name. So now I'm going to select my canvas and drag it onto it just like that. Open it up. Now we're not going to need these two namespaces for coroutines or lists, and we're not going to use these right now. Let's go ahead and create a SerializeField for our audio mixer and call it mixer. And you could see that we don't have access to the audio mixer. That's because we need to be using Unity and engine.audio in order to access that. And I'm also going to create a SerializeField for our slider, but we need to be using Unity engine.userInterface. And I'm going to call this music slider. And I'm going to duplicate this for sound effects slider. Now save your class, jump into Unity, and let's assign those right away. Assign your mixer, your music slider, and your sound effect slider. Back to Visual Studio. Now let's create a awake function. I don't use the private keyword because it's useless. Void and private are the same. So in here, we're gonna go music slider dot on value changed. So whenever the player changes the value of the slider, on value changed is called, and we're gonna go on value changed dot add a listener. So add a function to that, and this function requires a float parameter. So we're going to create a void set music volume, and it's going to require the float parameter, and we'll call it value. Drop the brackets, and we'll pass this in here, set music volume. And if you have any other parameters, it won't work. Now in this function, we want to go mixer.setFloat, and we want to set the float of our music channel. And to do that, we have to tap on our music channel and go to volume, right click, and expose this parameter, and down here open it up, and you will see this parameter. I'm going to rename that to music volume. I'm going to copy this so that we don't misspell it. Jump back into Visual Studio and create a constant string, call it mixer music. It's going to be equal to quotations, and then paste in the music volume. And I'm going to copy this constant string and paste it and call it mixer sound effects. Back to Unity, go to the sound effects channel, go to the volume, expose it, and go to this parameter, and let's call it sound effects volume, and copy it. Back into Visual Studio, let's paste that here. For sure, we know we didn't misspell it. And now in the set float, we're going to set the float for the mixer music channel, and now we need a value, and the value we're going to give it is the value passed in from the slider. Now let's just go test that out, and if we adjust our music slider, you could see that it's only changing the channel's volume by 1 decibel. That is because the slider's value is linear, but the channel's value is logarithmic. The linear scale goes by increments of 1 and -1, whereas the logarithmic scale goes by increments of times 10 and decreases by dividing by 10. So it goes to 1 to 10 to 100, but when you decrease it, it goes from 1 to 0.1 to 0.01 and so on and so forth. They do this because it's easier to graph. So we have to convert this value to the logarithmic value. And the way that we do that is using math.log10, and we'll log the value, and we multiply this value by 20 so that we're able to reach -90 decibels, which is 0 volume. Save, hit play, and now this is working much better. But you'll see if we hit 0, it goes back to 100%. That's because you're supposed to set your slider's minimum value to 0.0001, because if it hits 0, it'll just break the channel. And now it's working. Now let's hook up our sound effect slider as well. So we'll just copy this line and paste it here. Be very careful when you're copying, pasting code, because you can easily forget to say, maybe you forget to set this to sound effects slider, but you do change the function, then the sound effects slider will never work. So be extra cautious, but I'm doing that in this tutorial to save some time. Go ahead and copy and paste this function down here. We'll call this set sound effects volume. We want to use the mixer sound effects string. Now we can call that for the sound effects slider instead. Save that up, jump into Unity. Now if we set the sound effects to 0, you won't be able to hear button sound effects. It works. Now we want to be able to save these values so the player doesn't have to set them every single time they play. And we'll save them between scenes as well. So our canvas will be doing the saving, and our audio manager will be loading the channel's volumes. Let's go ahead and create a C# script called audio manager. Select our audio manager and drag it onto it. Open it up, and I won't use this namespace, or start an update. So the first thing that we need to do is create a singleton. Pretty simple. Let's create a public static audio manager called instance and create an awake function, and we check if instance is equal to null, meaning it hasn't been set and it doesn't exist. We say instance is equal to this, and now we don't destroy this game object onLoad. We have to pass in the game object so that all of our components and children prevail with us. Otherwise, if there's already an instance in the scene, we'll just destroy this game object so that there's not two in a given scene. I actually forgot to tell you that you need to prefab your audio manager and go to all of your other scenes. So on tank 2, wherever you need the audio manager, just drag the prefab in there so that if you start at tank 2, you'll have an audio manager in there. And I'll do that for all of the scenes. And that's it, Singleton created. Now this is public static, so it can now be accessed from anywhere. You'll probably have other classes needing a reference to it anyways. For instance, I just created this eat sound effects function. So now I'll have my fish go audio manager.instance.eat sound effects. So it'll call this function because it is public and because this instance is public static. So it's a really nifty way to get access to this class. Now you see that I coded this immediately. I already thoroughly explained how to do this in another video. All I did was got a reference to an audioSource, had a list of audio clips, and I play a random clip one shot. And you could see that I have a reference to my child, which has an audio source on it, and make sure this eat source output is connected to the MIXERS sound effects channel, and a reference to 3 fish eat clips. This isn't relevant to audio mixers, but if you want a more thorough explanation, you could watch this video. Now jumping back into Audio Manager, like I said, this class will only be doing the loading, and the volume settings will be doing the saving. So in here, we're going to create a constant string, and this will be the music key. It's going to be equal to music volume, and I'll copy this and paste it for the sound effects key and change its string. So we need the key in order to show player prefs where to save it. So before we create the load function, let's make the save function. So go into volume settings and on disable, so when you exit the scene or the object is disabled, we'll go ahead and save here. We'll go player prefs dot set float, so we're saving, and now we need a key, and that key is an audio manager. So we'll make these constant strings public so that we can access them. Jump back in here and go audio manager dot music key, and the value that we want to save is music slider dot value. And now we'll copy and paste this for the sound effects slider, use the sound effects key and the sound effects slider dot value. Now with the values being saved, let's go ahead in our audio manager and let's create a void load volume. We're putting the load function in here because the audio manager is going to be in every scene, but the volume settings won't be in every scene. So we can't load off of this because this is only in the settings. So this solves the problem, but it also makes it a little complicated. To clear that up a little bit, let's add a comment saying volume saved in volume settings.cs. Now to load the volume, we need access to the mixer. So we'll go up there and SerializeField audio mixer, and we need to be using unity engine.audio, and we'll call it mixer. Don't wait, save your class, go assign that right now. Back into Visual Studio. Now we can go mixer.setFloat, and we're going to set the float of the channel's name, and the channel names are in here. We need to make these constant strings public so that we can access them. Back into here, and now we're going to go volume settings dot mixer music, and the value we want to set it with is the loaded value. So to keep it more clear, I'll just create a float called music volume, and it's going to be equal to player prefs dot get float, so we're getting it this time or loading it, and again we need this key, and the key is music key. And if we fail to load the key, if it doesn't exist, then we'll have to pass in a default value, and we'll set that to 1F, so 100% volume. We'll copy and paste this for the sound effects volume using the sound effects key. Now keep in mind that this was saved in the sliders linear value, so it's going from 0 to 1, but the mixers channel uses a logarithmic value. So again, we'll have to use math.log10 to log this music volume volume, and again we'll multiply it by 20, and we'll duplicate this for the mixer sound effects channel, and we'll pass in the sound effects volume. Now I'm just going to make sure you don't make this mistake. For some reason, if you math log this directly in this variable instead of math logging it here, it won't work in other scenes. So just make sure to do it this way. Now with the function created, we need to actually call it, and we'll do that on awake. So load volume, and it will load our volume. And now if the volume settings are ever enabled, we'll just make sure the sliders update their values to whatever was loaded. So on start, we'll say music slider dot value. See, we're setting the value again is equal to, now we have to load the value again, player prefs dot get float, and we need these keys. So audio manager dot music key. Remember, default value, if it's not found, will be 1F, and we'll copy and paste this for the sound effects slider using the sound effects key. Now that was a bit daunting. I kind of just did everything at once. Sorry if I'm going a bit fast. This video might be too long. But if we hit play now it's not going to load any value because we didn't save anything yet. And you could see that since a save wasn't found, it set the sliders values to the default value, which was 1. And if we set sound effects to 0 and music to about 75%, and if we jump into the next scene, keeping our eye on these decibel levels, we'll see that they persist between the scenes. Awesome! Now I could have literally saved with 4 lines of code, but it wouldn't persist between loads. I want this to work for everybody. So this should be everything you need to know about audio mixers, and even how to save their values. If this video helped you out, be sure to like and subscribe so I can make more content like this. If you have any suggestions, leave it in the comments. And with that being said, I'll see you guys next time.